Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be doing a review of The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst. Now, this book has been catching a lot of people's attention recently in the cozy fantasy space, a genre that is absolutely on the rise. And this is, in my opinion, one of the best new additions to it. I've been a fan, I think like many of the cozy fantasy genre, since reading Legends and Lattes a couple of years ago, a book that essentially defined, or in modern times, defined what the genre is. And there have been a lot of folks who I think have really been attempting to sort of capture the magic of what Travis Baldree did with that initial book. And I think this book, of all the cozy fantasy reads that I have done since, I think has come the closest, not only to finding its own voice, but to really building upon what the genre is all about. Now, I've been reading a lot of really heavy stuff recently, space operas and, really deep books that are, looking at the intricate nature of the human soul and what does it mean to be human. And I think for a lot of us, being able to just take a step back, pick up a book that just transports us into another world where the stakes are that much lower, where the people are that much kinder, in the modern hustle and bustle of this day and age, with all the, nonsense and bullshit that we all deal with on the day-to-day, I think there's a reason that cozy fantasy has blown up the way it has. And I think this book is, if you're someone who's a fan of the genre or looking to explore more of what the genre has to offer, is definitely something that you should be taking a look at. Now, this is going to be a spoiler-free review. I'm just going to go through sort of the basic plot and synopsis and my thoughts about it. But if you can't tell so far off the bat, I was a really big fan of this book. It's honestly one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. It really took me by surprise. And again, one of these books that I think really deserves the hype that people are putting behind it. So let's talk about it. Now, like I said, The Spellshop is a cozy fantasy. It is a mono POV third person past tense, or third person limited past tense. So already off the bat, just checking so many boxes for me, this is exactly the kind of fantasy book that I like to read. Mono POV kind of notwithstanding, but I think for the genre it works incredibly well. It follows a person named Kiela. I don't want to say human because she's kind of human, but not really. We never really know what she is. She has blue skin and blue hair, but is, I think for all other intents and purposes, human, living in a world. We don't know what that world is per se, but she lives in the Crescent Islands Empire, which is kind of, I'm envisioning like an Earthsea-esque archipelago style chain of islands, nations. And when the book starts, she is in the middle of a revolution, really, like quite literally smack dab in the middle of a revolution. She's essentially a librarian at this world's equivalent of, I imagine, the Library of Alexandria, during when the Library of Alexandria is being sacked. I'm talking literally page 1. People are kicking down the doors and the library is on fire. We are immediately introduced to this character who, right off the bat, has such a visceral personality. She is the quintessential homebody. She lives and breathes her work. If she can go days or weeks without speaking to another human being, she is more than happy to do so. Doesn't mean that there aren't other characters in this book, and the first one we're introduced to is Kaz, who is a sentient spider plant, which, as sidekicks go, definitely a unique one. And just the nuance of this character, not only in their personality, but also the practicality of having a sentient plant that carries the root ball around with them. And it's just like, cool, I'm doing stuff. As sidekicks go, certainly unique. And literally the first chapter is them taking as many books as they humanly can, saving them, getting on a boat, fleeing the city out in the middle of the night. The revolution is happening all around them. Everything's on fire. And this person who's only really ever lived and experienced things through books, suddenly fleeing with these incredibly valuable tomes, not only histories, but spell books. And that is really the crux of this book, is the idea that magic is very, very highly regulated in this world, or the world as it was pre-revolution. And that's part of why the revolution is happening. And it's about her fleeing, taking these books with her, and essentially realizing, hey, I kind of need to build a new life. Now, when it comes to the start of this book and the inciting incident, I don't think I've ever seen a book so flawlessly execute like almost a page 1 inciting incident. Like when we talk about an inciting incident, it's the call to action or the call to adventure. And this literally happens in the first chapter. I feel like a lot of other authors would have sat down and they would have done some sort of prologue, or they would have done like some sort of day in the life, and they would have tried to set up this character a little bit more. But you really don't get, other than in flashbacks, you really don't get any of that. You just get her as a character as she is thrust into this new life and this new world. And this book trims all the fat in such a beautiful way. It gets right to the good stuff. Because one of the quintessential elements of cozy fantasy, or as it has been in modern times, is often the act of rebirth, rejuvenation, and rebuilding. And in this case, she realizes, look, I mean, my parents emigrated to this capital city when I was a child, but we still have a cottage on the tiny little island that I grew up in. And I haven't been there since I was a kid, but I think we actually still have I might still have a house there. Her parents have passed away, but I'm going to go back and see if I can hide out there. And at first her plan is quite literally just to hide out. If she cannot interact with another human being, that would be great for her. It's really just her and Kaz. It's her and this plant. But over time, other characters sort of come in, and she realizes, on this tiny island where every single person knows every other person, trying to remain independent or isolated is going to be impossible. And the book is really about her coming out of her shell of who she is as a person. Now, this is cozy fantasy, but it is also, I think, very much a romance, as a lot of cozy fantasies have sort of a lot of genres, period, have started to trend towards of late. It is a male-female romance with there's a couple, there's it's sort of an interesting love interest dynamic, but one of the main characters, Laren, he is a merhorse farmer. A merhorse, he breeds and manages flocks of merhorses, which are they're hippocampi. They're exactly what you'd expect them to be. But what's interesting about this island of Cultry, is that, again, I'm getting a ton of Earthsea, very much Le Guin-esque vibes and connotations in this, is that it's traditionally has been very well managed by magic. And the core center of this empire would send wizards out, or sorcerers out, to sort of maintain the balance of things, but that hasn't happened in years. And so everything is out of whack and in disarray. And it sort of follows Keela, who's come here and realizes she has a box full of spell books, but she's not a sorcerer, she's a librarian, thinking to herself, how do I make a life here, and how can I help these people? Because, the core cast of characters are incredibly likable, incredibly charismatic, incredibly well built, and there are a plethora of them. We're talking centaurs and people with wings and multiple sets of arms, and every single character in this world in some way is essentially magical. And it's made so normal that you kind of don't really think about it until you have to. And I think the author does a really good job of sort of making the magical feel mundane, but in a very wholesome way. And that's really all I'm going to talk about there, because obviously drama unfolds. It can't be that easy. Her opening up a spell shop, which is the quintessential name of the book, and her sort of little series of adventures, because she's essentially fled with a bunch of illegal stolen books. And how does she protect them? How does she keep them safe? How, will she keep her secret intact? And sort of the balance and the juggling act that she has to go about while still trying to make some kind of her life for herself on this island. Overall, again, I was incredibly impressed with this book. I think I'd probably give this book a 4.5. It was very nearly about a perfect entry for me. The third act does get a little bit convoluted. It does feel like Durst kind of tried to set up quite a few sort of disparate, different plot lines, and some of them were more important than others. And I felt like, I really respect, she really wanted to make sure that everything was tied up incredibly well. This is very much a standalone book. I don't really know if you could put a sequel on this. I don't know if you necessarily want to, but it's sort of in her desire to make sure everything had such a pretty bow on it. It did end up getting a little bit convoluted, but I still do think it stuck the landing fairly well. It does have very much all the hallmarks, the quintessential cozy fantasy tropes. Again, like a lot of things that we've seen of late, I think Legends and Lattes really set the template, and that was expanded upon in Bookshops and Bone Dusts and various other entries into this genre. The idea of, I don't know why it's this sort of seems to have been the trend. You make a business and grow and thrive that business and help the people out around you in the process, and bring together this sort of found family, lovable collection and cast of characters. And again, it's not necessarily a super unique take on the vibe, or on the genre, I should say, but it is executed extremely well. And the characters are really well done. Their pros and their cons. Even the characters who are maybe a little bit too perfect are so endearing that you don't even necessarily really mind. And there's a character who sort of learns to give as much as they get, so you don't necessarily feel like they're sort of getting it out of turn, or it's like, why is everybody being so nice to this person? They do legitimately have moments of realization of people are just allowed to be nice in this world, which again, I think if you're someone who's looking for things in cozy fantasy, really a hallmark of a job well done on this one. So yeah, I would rate this one extremely high. Of the cozy fantasy reads that I've read in the last little while, this definitely stands out. I think it's the number one for me. I think it came out last month. And yeah, as recommendations go, if you're into the genre, I strongly recommend it. Or if you're looking to get into the genre, I would even put this above something like a Bookshops and Bone Dust, which I think was quite a bit of a step down from Legends and Lattes. That's obviously the first book that everyone always recommends. So if you're looking to get into the genre, I think this would be a pretty darn good place to start if you're maybe someone coming from more of a traditional romance side of things. So there it is, a short and sweet review on this one. Again, I think this book had so many great things going for it. I think the magic system was interesting, though I wish it did have more of a tangible, stronger drawback. But again, I think this is just where cozy fantasy comes into play. And I do think that maybe a fine couple of little tweaks in the back end would have made it a 5 out of 5 book, but this is pretty darn near perfect. And I would definitely recommend this one, even if you're not necessarily a big fan of the genre. So yeah, that's it. That's the Spellshop. Really quick. I read it in one evening. So that says, I think, quite a bit. It's a quick, fun, easy read, cuts all the fat, just gets to the good stuff. And I was just big grin on my face the whole way through, pretty much. So yeah, if you're looking for a quick cozy fantasy read to pick up, this is certainly going to be the one. But that's it for this review. Thank you all so much for watching. If you liked it, like and subscribe, the usual good stuff. And I'll see you next time. Cheers.